You've got to be there to run your business. You've got to have a presence. I don't care what business it is. You've got to be there. If you're taking a risk, and see that's the thing in the personal training business, especially these gyms today. I see this that I'm certified. I'm a personal this. I got all these credentials. Yeah, but you're not taking the risk. You're just making money off that equipment somebody else put the money into.
Welcome to Corporate Warrior, the podcast that brings you the best advice on how to improve your health, optimize performance, and maximize productivity. With your host, Lawrence Neal.
This podcast is brought to you by HitUni.com. HitUni.com are a provider of amazing online courses for high-intensity training qualifications. HitUni comes highly recommended by the best in the field, including Body by Science co-author Dr. Doug McGuff, Discover Strength CEO Luke Carlson, and trainer and founder of Bay.com, Drew Bay. It was founded by my friend, author, and longtime personal trainer Simon Shawcross, who's also been a guest on the podcast. Simon has 15 years experience training clients and has supervised over 15,000 high-intensity training workouts. Using knowledge from experts like Skylar Tanner, Dr. James Steele, Dr. Ellington Darden, HitUni is a goldmine for learning everything to do with high-intensity training. The courses are delivered online through the website, where you can learn via a variety of multimedia materials at your own pace. There's online support and a discussion forum where you can share ideas and ask for help. To learn more about high-intensity training and improve my own results, I started their personal trainer course. The content is amazing, the courses are really easy to follow, and each section is organized into bite-sized chunks that give you a real sense of achievement after you complete each one. I should also mention there is a DIY course. So this is the course for you if you're not necessarily a personal trainer, but you want to learn more about high-intensity training and how to implement it for maximum benefit in your own exercise regime. To get your exclusive Corporate Warrior 10% discount on any course you purchase, simply head on over to hituni.com, that's HITUNI.com, and enter the coupon code CW10, that's CW and the number 10. So again, head on over to hituni.com, pick your course, and enter the coupon code CW10 for 10% discount. Thank you for your support. Hey guys, I am Lawrence Neal, and welcome to another episode of Corporate Warrior, the podcast that teaches you how to optimize your high-intensity training for maximum results and start and grow your strength training business. My former guests include the who's who in high-intensity training, including Dr. Doug McGuff, Drew Bay and Jim Flanagan, paleo pioneers Mark Sisson and Rob Wolf, successful strength training entrepreneurs like Luke Carlson and Roger Schwab, and everything in between. Before I introduce this episode, I just want to talk to you quickly about the Corporate Warrior membership. This is a membership that I've designed to help you get the best results from your high-intensity training and or start and grow your strength training business with exclusive, very high-quality podcast and digital content, amazing community, one-on-one coaching from me, and exclusive discounts on high-intensity training products and services like courses, workout gear, exercise equipment, events, and much more. To learn more about that, please go to corporatewarrior.co/membership. Now, I know I've said this before on the previous episode, but I just want to reiterate, that this is one of the most exciting projects I'm currently working on. It's the best way I feel I can have the biggest and most positive impact on growing the awareness of high-intensity training. And that is by helping you get amazing results in terms of optimizing muscle gain and fat loss, but also helping you build the most successful or just achieving whatever goals you set for yourself in terms of your strength training business. So again, to find out more about that, go to corporatewarrior.co/membership. As many of you know, I had the rather exciting opportunity recently to attend the Resistance Exercise Conference. And I know a lot of you guys were keen to get some of the information from that event in this podcast. I got to enjoy a couple of days of joyous strength training community, learn from great speakers, experience the toughest workout of my life, and I'm not even exaggerating about that, and meet some of my personal heroes. It was amazing, and I highly, highly recommend you try and attend in 2019, since the ROI is incredibly high, and if you're really passionate about this stuff, you just have to be there, and you'll have the time of your life. During a conference, I had the good fortune to conduct short interviews with most of the speakers, and and really dig into their talks and ask a lot of my own questions. I was so impatient about this that during the Q&A after the speaker had finished their main talk, I had my hand up trying to ask questions, and I think Luke had made the wise decision to ignore me since I was going to be able to have my own private Q&A afterwards. So it was a little bit cheeky from me, really. This episode is a compilation of all of the interviews I created at the conference. So first up, you've got the charming Jim Flanagan, following his fireside chat with Luke, and we mainly discuss how to work on the business versus in the business, how to find great quality people, and the importance of taking risks in your business. Then I speak with motivational scientist, Dr. Michelle Segar, who is absolutely lovely. She is an expert on motivating clients, and we got to talk about decision fatigue in relation to training motivation, specifically how to motivate people to participate in strength training and bridging the gap between contemplation and action. Next, I have the delightful and hilarious Dr. Ted Dreisinger, who gave a wonderful talk on the issues related to lower back pain, and I had the opportunity to ask Ted all of the nitty-gritty questions around the best exercises to rehab and strengthen the lower back. And lastly, I have PhD candidate Rob Morton, who spoke about skeletal muscle hypertrophy, protein metabolism, and resistance training. I got to geek out with Rob on optimal protein intake and dosage frequency, and optimal resistance training protocols for lean gains, as well as carbs for protein sparing, and much, much more. A quick note on that, I was quite nervous meeting Rob and incredibly surprised when Rob actually approached me on the first night and said he was really looking forward to meeting me and couldn't get a chance to say hello before because I was in the middle of talking to a bunch of people. So that really shocked me because he was someone I was a little nervous about meeting, and yeah, I was incredibly surprised when he came over and told me that. Sadly, I couldn't find the time to interview Dr. James Fisher, Luke, Brandon, and Mike Gittleson, who also spoke on the day, including many of the Discover Strength staff. But fear not, I am scheduling interviews with some of the aforementioned very, very soon. For all the show notes and links for this episode, please go to corporatewarrior.co/rec. That's corporatewarrior.co/REC. And that's where you'll find the show notes for this one. But for all the other episodes I've recorded on this podcast, please go to corporatewarrior.co/podcast. I'm not sure if the content for the entire conference will be available to the public. If it is, I will be sure to include it in this post. For your free gift at the end, don't forget to wait around at the end of this podcast. And now I give you the amazing speakers of the legendary Resistance Exercise Conference. So it's Lawrence and Jim here. Lawrence from Corporate Warrior. I'm with the legend Jim Flanagan. You just gave a great fireside chat, and we were at the Resistance Exercise Conference today. I just had a few questions for you following that. We've got 15 minutes, so just a couple of questions for you, Jim.
Sure.
You give some really good advice on business, and not just fitness business, but like business principles in general that I thought were really valuable. Right. There's a lot of listeners to this podcast who have a strength training business or a fitness business. Have you got any other advice that comes to mind, or common mistakes you see for the listeners?
Well, back when I was involved in the fitness business as a customer of Nautilus and head of my gym or my fitness center, we sold memberships. Today, it's more a personalized one-on-one personal training business. I see more of those things developing. And the only problem I see with that is, and I'm guilty too, is you become kind of married to your client. You can't break away to run the business like you're supposed to because they're putting their investment in you. And there's a comfort zone there. So you got to deal with that and make sure that you can find the right quality of people. And I think Luke Carlson has got that formula figured out because of his regimentation of his training program and what they bring people along a certain way with certain standards of what their philosophy is, their mission statement, and they pulled it off. It's very impressive to watch that. So because he can run his business. He can't be training people every day, although he did when he was in the high school level. He took those people through workouts all the time. So I think that's a key thing, that you've got to break away and delegate.
Yeah, and no, I agree with you 100%. And it's,
things like mission statements and things like that, philosophies, a lot of people hear that and they think it's cliche. They don't take it seriously. But I agree with you that Luke with Discover Strength, he seems to have he takes that very seriously and has turned that into a formula for how he brings on new trainers and trains them. Have you got any, I know obviously Luke has his own philosophy and strategy, but have you got any thoughts on how you might go about selecting personal trainers if you were running a business like Luke?
Well, those days are over for me. But I would do things a lot different than what I did. I trusted people that I thought would have the work ethic that I had, and I was naive. So I had to pay the cost to be the boss, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. And it cost me a lot of money because I had the wrong people there, and I thought they would do it with me not being there. So I learned some hard lessons. But I pulled it off for almost 15 years. But it was rough. It was rough. But to answer your question, you got to be there to run your business. You've got to have a presence. I don't care what business it is. You got to be there. If you're taking a risk, and see that's the thing in the personal training business, especially these gyms today. I see this that I'm certified. I'm a personal this. I got all these credentials. Yeah, but you're not taking the risk. You're just making money off that equipment somebody else put the money into. And that's, to me, I have a problem with that. I mean, to me, you've got. People who take the risk, they're the ones out there that got to drive the business home and herd the cattle. I mean, put parameters around people and make sure they go with the rules. Not everybody can own their own business. I understand that too, but it's a tough business, and you've got to run it like a business. You've got to have a mission statement. What are you trying to accomplish? Where is your market? What's your radius? Where's your dynamics? Where's the income? You got to do study. You got to look. You just can't do what I did. I was lucky because nobody knew what Nautilus was back then. We were pioneers. Everybody, what is this? But Arthur Jones was branding the name Nautilus on a international level over time, and that drove people to these facilities. Just the name Nautilus became a household brand. But everybody thought that he was involved in the fitness centers. He never owned one of those. See, he gave the name away. We put the name on there. I should have had another name featuring Nautilus equipment, but branding my name, but I didn't do that. But you live and learn. But it's a tough business, and I mean, people call me, I'll shoot square with them. You may not want to do this. You better be ready to put a lot of time into it, and it's a risk. So,
are there any kind of clear signs when it's clear to you that someone isn't right? It's not right for them to do a fitness business. Strength training, gym-based business.
Well, like I said, I kind of threw it out there. I said, it's not the grade you make; it's the hands you shake. I mean, I had people come, I got this degree, I've got this PhD. That's great, but can you close a sale? Can you get that person to commit that check, which pays your bills and your salary? And when they're going to show up, you got to work the business. You got to have so many appointments a week. You got to build this thing up slowly, and then as you grow and have so many sessions, you got to have good trainers to take over the load factor, or have them bring their people in. But they got to go with your rules and your philosophies, and that's what a lot of them have a problem. Especially, I've seen it in several facilities I saw in the last 10 years. They have all this equipment, our equipment, as a matter of fact, and all of a sudden they have these new trainers come in. All of a sudden, here's the Swiss balls. Here's the rubber bands. Wait a minute. If this equipment's so good, why are you doing that? In my gym back in the day, I had 41 Nautilus machines in one gym. My partner, he had, I think, 29 in another. I sold that to him. And we never had any barbells in there. But all of a sudden, well, you got to have free weights. What? Well, I don't need free weights. So you're diluting what you're trying to accomplish. Now, if you want to open a barbell gym, go be my guest. Hey, that's great. I cut my teeth in a barbell gym. That's all they had at that time. 49 years ago, almost 50 years next year. Actually, 50 years this year, excuse me. Yeah, 68. June of 68, I signed up at Milo's Gym 50 years ago. So.
Going back to it almost reminds me of what you said about focus. And I think, again, not to compliment Luke too much, but obviously he's done a really good job with Discover Strength in that they have very clear values. Like, I can't remember the 3 values now. It's like expert, strength training, and I think one other. And it's clear to me that he's very clear on this is what we do and this is the tools we use to do it. And I see a lot of other gyms using lots of different tools, like you mentioned, to try and achieve different outcomes. Do you think that's quite problematic if they're becoming too...
Well, it depends. I've seen people, one of my dear friends didn't have the money budget to buy all Med-X, but he put in a few pieces of Med-X. He put in a core program, but he had basically conventional equipment. And he ran Nautilus gyms way back when up in Norfolk, Virginia, and one in Atlanta. He could sell, and his name was Raymond Long. I've talked about him before on your broadcast. Mm-hmm. And this guy, but he came back limited, and he came to seek me out, and he helped me way back when, and he's wanting my advice. And I said, Raymond, do what you do best. You sell memberships. Mm-hmm. You're good at it. You were doing $25,000 a month back in the 70s.
Wow.
With Nautilus machines, selling memberships for these guys. I mean, he could sell. He could close the deal.
He was selling gym memberships, was he?
Yeah, it was a Nautilus Fitness Center in Norfolk, Virginia.
Okay, so he didn't have his own gym.
No, he worked for 2 guys.
Okay, so he was like commission based, selling memberships.
Yeah, he had a salary plus a car and a commission base, and he knew how to do it, but he was good at it. So he came to see me. I said, do what you do best. Well, he named his gym Personal Best. A little gym in DeLand, Florida, clean as a whistle. You could look like you can eat off the floor. He had a business, and he sold it. He's retired. He did it. I think he had it for about 12, 13 years, and sold it to a guy, and he's fishing now, having a good life.
So he was a commission-based salesperson selling memberships, and then he started his own gym. But obviously, that's a different focus. He's gone from sales to then some element of personal training.
But he knew how to manage it.
Okay.
He knew how to manage it. He did a little personal training, but it was basically memberships in the gym in DeLand, a small Asian town by Stetson University. And I was over there a few times. I'd take him to lunch, and I'd go, "Wow, he's doing it again." And the place was immaculate. It was all conventional equipment. He had some of the posters of Muhammad Ali and the bodybuilders on the wall. He trained the president of Stetson. He had the gift. He had the gift. He could make you like him. You get along with him. He would do what he says he's going to do, and he would help you personally, and he did. He pulled it off. So did a good job.
Cool.
He's retired.
Awesome. No, fair play to him. You've got a few minutes left. Just wanted to ask you 1 or 2 final questions. We talked a lot about in your talk. You talked about the success you had selling the Nautilus machines, and we talked about this a little bit on the podcast as well. And there's a lot of new machine providers or equipment types coming out today. I mean, we've got a few on demo today at the conference. And I'm just interested to know, like, what would be your advice to the new machines that are coming out, those that you support, those that are congruent with the principles of strength training? What would be your advice in terms of how they can go about successfully selling those machines to the industry?
Well, I think they need to look at education, and nobody's doing the education side of it like we did it back in the day. I think they need to bring that back because there's a lot of misuse. I don't care how good the tool is or how bad it is. If you don't know how to use it properly, you're going to misuse it and somebody's going to get hurt. You got a liability problem. They need to bring seminars back. They need to spend time. They need to build the relationship with the prospective customer, just like the old days, and really spend time with them and build the trust, and then teach them how to use the product, cover it up, and make sure you back the tool, make sure the warranty's there, and you take care of the customer. But it's a tough business. There's over 50 companies out there making equipment. Yeah, it's kind of sad in a way.
A lot of the equipment's crap, right?
Yeah, well, I don't. Yeah.
Not to call out any names, but
there's a lot of it that's just. Well, I think I may have told you a story about. I told you a story about Arthur Jones going to the trade show. I told Luke tonight. I didn't say it in front of them, but he was having issues health-wise. He was mentally depressed, and he was winding down. He was tired and burned out. He retired that year, but he won some. They acknowledged him as a Man of the Year award, some big fitness trade show in Vegas. So we released a jet, flew him out there, and one of those damage control deals. He gets recognized, comes on the stage, and they give him a nice big plaque, and talk about his accolades, and takes the microphone, and he goes, I haven't been to a fitness trade show in 10 years, since I sold my Nautilus company in 1986. I'm the past chairman, inventor, and owner of Nautilus Sports Medical Industries, current owner, chairman, and inventor of Medix technology. And he said, I got here up this morning early with the intentions of walking the floor of the exhibit hall before it opened to see if there's any innovative changes. And much to my surprise, I was very hurt by what I saw and very upset what I saw, because there's over 38 companies that have blatantly violated my patents and stole my work. Whoa. You could hear a pin drop. Now, to me, I'm thinking, oh, brother, here we go. And he walked off the stage. To me, if anybody legitimately was really for real out there, they'd have challenged him. But they did not. And he walked off. And it was kind of sad in a way, but I could tell it kind of hurt him, bothered him, But that's the business you're in, unfortunately. And a patent doesn't protect you anymore, like everybody says it does. He just got tired of dealing with people, I guess. That was 96.
Yeah.
And he retired from Medix and then became very reclusive. Yeah. I'd go see him once a month till he died. He died in August 28, 2007.
Yeah. What would you, when you went to see him, towards the end, what would you talk about? What would you do when you spent time together?
Talk about some of the old days or whatever. Ask questions. He'd sit there. He'd read a book, and then he'd ask you a question. And what are you weighing? Or it was just it meant a lot that somebody came by to see him. Yeah. I think in the end he was pretty reclusive, and a lot of people never came around, unfortunately. But those who really knew him came by. Yeah. So.
No, I really appreciate you sharing that. Cool. Okay, well, I want to be respectful of your time, Jim, so thanks for joining me for this short...
Great to get to meet you.
You too, likewise.
I recognize you as soon as I saw you.
Very impressive in person.
Oh, shoot. I'm old. I'm getting old, man. This is tough.
Well, you look young. So, hello everyone, it's Lawrence here from Corporate Warrior Podcast. I'm with Michelle Segar, hopefully I've said your name correctly, and we're at the Resistance Exercise Conference. Michelle just gave an awesome presentation on motivation regarding exercise, and I had a few follow-up questions for you, Michelle. I really enjoyed it for a start. I got a lot out of it. I think it's certainly something that is very close to everyone's heart. They're all trying to figure out, how can I get my clients to exercise, and also in my case, how can I get my friends and my loved ones to do more exercise? So it gave us some awesome mindsets and tools to do that. One of the things you talked about, which really resonated with me, was this concept of depleting decision, which I'm guessing is kind of drawing on decision fatigue.
Yes, that's right.
It's the thing that came up for me. Can you just talk a little bit about that and how that plays out for people and why that stops them from?
Sure. So if we take a big step back and think about how many decisions we have to make in our day about so many things. It's not just about exercise. It's about our food choices. It's about what time we're going to pick our kids up with. There's so many decisions we have to make. And so if our exercise is dependent on us each having sufficient willpower to power through ambivalence or dislike of our exercise regimen, in that context, we won't be able to have the source of decision-making power or self-control is not infinite, and so that's why we have to contextualize the notion that we actually choose to move or we don't choose to move, and if we don't want to do it, then we have to force ourselves to do it. But in the context of everything else we have to do in our day, exercise is going to be likely to be low on the totem pole for someone who isn't absolutely fully committed to what they're doing.
Okay, so let's go into that a little bit more. How do we get people motivated and want to actually do the exercise?
So, it's you want to help people figure out what is going to work for them, and I think there's a bit of a exploration. It depends. You often want to start with what are people's goals, and the thing is that we've all been socialized pretty much. We've been educated in society to have the similar types of goals for exercise. But the problem with that is these goals, there's just a handful of them that people don't even understand that there's this whole other...
They're like surface goals, aren't they? Like health, it's like so ambiguous.
It's ambiguous. It's future.
Right?
It's in the future. It's also an ideal. And in today's world, everyone is so busy, they really only have time to fit in not what in theory I'd like to do or in theory I value and I would raise my hand for, but what cuts the mustard, what makes the cut on a daily basis, what activity is going to either help me feel in a way that I deeply want to feel or is going to help me better succeed at the roles and goals I care most about.
This is really interesting because a lot of people at this conference are really, and listening to this, are very passionate about strength training.
Yes.
And I'm certainly biased and an advocate of strength training because if you're looking at exercise in terms of its potency for improving all markers of health, I just don't think anything else really competes. However, doing something is better than nothing. How do we, the number of people that are actually doing resistance training in the US, at least, is a very, very low percentage, like single-digit percentage, which is a real shame. But how do we, getting someone to do something like walking or jogging, in my mind, feels maybe easier. But we in this conference and those listening really want more people to participate in strength training.
Yes.
And in particular, high-intensity training because it's, the name is quite intimidating to people, but it's very safe and it's very time efficient, so it makes sense. So how do you think about that, and how do you think we can get more people engaged in that more effective form of exercise?
Right. Well, it's a hard question. I think if I were in your field, I would create entry points and brand them in really friendly ways. Calling something, high intensity. I would not. If you're trying to get the people who aren't doing it already, it's kind of like that's often true as we preach to the choir. But if you want to expand your consumer base, then you've got to really take a step back and say, where are they coming from? What beliefs and fears and experiences have they had that might get in the way of them being interested at all? And how could I intrigue them with this idea? And I think if you could give them a taste, like even the idea that people can come taste, high intensity. But I would come up, to tell you the truth, if people truly want to bring in the people who don't do this kind of thing, and I would say if people don't do it, they're probably intimidated by it and afraid of it. Like just going in, I would make that assumption, although doing market research about this would be helpful. And I would brand it in a way that focuses on the benefits, not the features. Really, high intensity is a feature. What's the benefit of it?
Yeah, quite.
Quick, energy-producing, exercise that you can fit in, that you can easily fit in. I mean, thinking about focusing on that.
That's so cool because everyone here is such an outlier, and we're passionate about that. We are a little bit of no pain, no gain, a little bit. So no, that's really awesome to learn. And I think it's funny because a lot of the successful high intensity training studios, they don't even use the words high intensity training.
Really,
Skylar Tanner, who's here, who's very well known in this field, his gym's called Smart Strength, and he never talks about high intensity training. I don't even think Luke talks about it much in Discover Strength, and that's obviously very, very deliberate because it is an intimidating label.
Yes.
So it's amazing how important the language and the branding is in terms of getting more people involved.
And not just the initial branding and language, but what's the questions that are on the intake sheet, the onboarding process, all of that helps shape people's perceptions. And, I think your industry needs a kindergarten. I think you guys need an accepted, respected entree for people who are not so geeked about what you're doing, but could benefit from it, or even a different version of it, if you could help them learn to value it and not be afraid of it.
Yeah, because one of the things you said just now, which is really key, is this tasting aspect.
Yes.
Lots of the business owners here, they provide a free introductory session. I know Luke does, because this type of strength training that we do, it's so hard to explain it. You have to experience it to really understand it. And that's a deliberate sales tactic, because once people go through it, they do feel amazing. Well, they feel very tired and fatigued, like I do after my morning workout today, but they do feel amazing. I remember once, and this is really cool, I interviewed a business owner out in the UK called Simon Shawcross, and he has a client who's in her 90s, and she does high intensity training, and she would say after a workout that it feels like every cell in her body is dancing. And that gave me more ideas for language, right? And for if you do this is how you're going to feel. I think very few people are talking about that.
So talk about a great study is to just qualitatively interview people, women, men, different age groups, and actually ask them how they feel, and you could use it as an example, and then there's a study right there, and that could also help with future marketing. But I'm curious, what percentage of the people who come in for if any type of free high intensity strength training experience don't come back?
Because
what's the compliance? It's I'm thinking less about compliance and more about just joining, because it was too hard, or so is it, I'm just wondering if there's but maybe that is the free.
Yeah, I have no idea what the win rate is.
Yeah,
I guess it's not just a workout; it's the whole experience. Like, for instance, at Discover Strength, Luke has everything systematized. He has everything's very deliberate. Like the way the trainers treat new clients with so much professionalism.
Yes.
The way they follow up the workout with "How would you like to get started?"
Yes.
Very open but assumptive questions that might lead them to becoming a client.
Yes.
So I think it would be a difficult study to do, but I guess it could be done. Yeah.
You mean to find out what percentage of people actually?
Yeah, maybe it's not that difficult to do.
It wouldn't be. It's all in the records. It would be very easy to know what percent. But that potentially could be a hint at. It depends on if you want to expand the core base to people that aren't as passionate about the high stuff, but maybe there's a happy medium where you could offer something and get more people doing it. Again, if we're only talking about a gold standard, we're going to miss most people.
Yeah, it's so true, but it's so hard, if even myself and many people in that room, to not agree, but accept that, because we see so much. Because obviously, one thing which you may have had conversation with here is this focus on doing strength training to muscular failure, because we know that once you get there or close to there, you flick a lot of switches, in terms of improving lots of markers of health like strength and muscle mass and bone mineral density, and the list is vast. So it's there we want to get to, but I guess even if we get 50% of the way there, it's better than baseline, right?
Yes.
With some people. And
it gets back to, it's a different exercise, but it reminds me of, clinicians saying the old, my patients have to exercise at 70% VO2 max, or whatever the percentage is, because they need, in order to get the maximal benefit. But if most people aren't going to comply with the maximal benefit, then you're really limited with who you're impacting. You know what I mean? So it's this compromise between gold standard and nothing. So where's the middle?
Yeah. And I guess one last thing to mention is, a lot of people listening to this and the business owners at this conference, they're not even that probably that as interested in public health. They're interested in running their businesses, so they don't mind appealing to a sort of minority so long as it's making their business profitable. So I think, I'm not sure if this intervention to get more people exercising is going to come from. They'll bleed off the edges a little bit, and their clients will tell others who maybe aren't so motivated that they should do it. So maybe I'm making an incorrect assumption there.
Well, I mean, the question is, I'm not talking even from a public health perspective. I'm talking about from a potential client and member perspective. If it's still regarding, I mean, if you are happy with your current level of clientele, meaning the revenue generation stream and all of that, then there's no reason to think beyond this very niche group. But if you're trying to expand, and one way to expand is to say, I'm going to have another level that might be less intense, and it's not that you wouldn't ever get them there, but it might be a personal preference thing. So are you going to leave out potential people that could potentially grow your business and you could potentially help just because they don't want to go till exhaustion? So that's just a question.
No, it's a great question, and it's something for I think everyone to think about. Time's up. You've got a plane to catch.
Okay.
But thank you so much for joining me, Michelle. It's been a pleasure. And for all the listeners, please go to corporatewarrior.org to find the episode for this. Find the show notes for this episode. You'll also find the show notes for all of the mini interviews that I did at the Resistance Exercise Conference. So it's Lawrence here from Corporate Warrior. I'm here at the Resistance Exercise Conference with Dr. Ted Dreisinger. Have I said your name correctly?
That's right, Dreisinger.
That's a Dreisinger, okay.
Well, it sounds like dry cleaners. Most people don't remember that, so it's just Dreisinger is good.
Well, that's a good start. You gave a really interesting talk yesterday about how to prevent lower back pain. And how we can strengthen our backs more intelligently. I just really liked if you'd be able to give a very brief overview of what you spoke about and what the key kind of takeaways were from yesterday's talk.
Sure, Lawrence. The one of the things that happens in the management of chronic back and neck pain is in physiotherapy is we do almost nothing for the back. So if you look at the way it's typically treated, we do a lot of core work, abdominals, a little bit of upper back work. But patients don't come to the doctor with pain in their abdominals. They come to the doctor with pain in their back. Now, the origin of that pain we're unclear about. Most back pain, 80% gets better, really no matter what you do. And that was framed what I talked about yesterday. But whatever's going on in that segment of the low back, whether it's radiating or whether it's isolated to the back, is in some way either a mechanical deal, maybe a chemical deal, but also the important key in the management of any kind of injury is increasing blood flow and, of course, having good mechanics. So strengthening the low back, if you think of what allows you to stand erect, it's your hamstrings, glutes, and then the low back muscles, which in that three-link chain are kind of small. We typically neglect that small three-link chain oftentimes to our detriment. So the construct yesterday was the importance of strength in the management of chronic back and neck pain. In our experience over the years and now in the published literature, it is probably the most effective and predictable management tool that can be used. There are almost 100 publications now in the area of strengthening the low back. Maybe 30 of them are clinical studies. The earlier work was all randomized controlled with healthy people, and then there were cohort studies in the middle, most of which I was involved in. And now the work is demonstrating with randomized controlled trials the same thing we saw in the cohort study. So reduce pain, increase function, and the only way to increase function in chronic disease is strengthening. You can do lots of other things, but if you want to increase your ability to function day to day, strength is the key. And consequently, low back strength is important. That was one concept from yesterday. The other is prevention of injury. We've done some work in the airline industry and ambulances and groceries and other industries. and demonstrated that when you strengthen the low back, costs go down. And so oftentimes insurance companies might not be interested in back strengthening, but if you're a CEO of a company that has a bottom line to take care of, cost savings in your biggest musculoskeletal hitter, which is back pain, strengthening can reduce that dramatically. So we've had good experience with that. So I'm a real fan of clinical strengthening for chronic back pain and also as a preventive tool.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So what we talked about a number of tools yesterday, Med-X being one of those. Do you want to just talk about the tools that you advocate for strengthening the lower back?
Yeah, so you want to sort of strengthen muscles in isolation if you can. And there's, I don't have any problem with the multi-joint exercise activity. But if you want to strengthen the biceps, the best way to do it is sort of isolate the biceps, if that's your idea. It's really difficult to strengthen the low back, and if your listeners try to think about that, it's difficult to contract those muscles in isolation. You have to sort of think about it as if you're sitting in a bucket of concrete right up to your hips, and now you can move the low back without moving something else.
It's a great metaphor.
Yeah, so a low-tech way to do that, actually, there's some data that suggests that you can reduce osteoporotic fractures just by lying on the floor and doing Superman exercises, really contracting those lumbar extensors. That's a very, very low-tech. A Swiss ball can be used if someone... Oh, go ahead, sorry.
No, sorry. When you said the Superman exercise, is that comparable to like a prone trunk extension?
It is a prone trunk extension, exactly, but not with your hands, not like a cobra or an up dog in yoga. It's done by contracting the muscles rather than a passive movement with the arms aiding in it. A Swiss ball can be used if you can anchor your feet to lie over the ball in a flexed position and then extend your trunk with your low back. Moving up, but still low tech, is a Roman chair.
Okay.
It's better to have an angulated Roman chair, meaning that the feet are down toward the ground and rather than horizontal, because when you flex over a Roman chair and your feet are down, you load the trunk right away, the center of mass. If you're horizontal, you sort of don't have any load when you begin the exercise. Exercising to volitional failure is important, and it's important when you're on a Roman chair that you don't use your glutes. So it's like riding a bike. You have to sort of think that and feel it. If you pigeon-toe yourself on a Roman chair on a foot plate and then think of yourself as scooping up with your low back, probably not getting much higher than horizontal, but like pulling a trigger on a gun, you want to aim it and slowly squeeze. So with the multifidi, once you've had that experience and you feel it, relax your glutes, squeeze them, and then relax. Most people, if they do the Roman chair exercise properly, probably can't do 11 or 12 full repetitions.
Right.
Then moving up a little bit further, in gyms you might see a low back machine. Oftentimes, because the lower extremities aren't stabilized, what you do is get a really good glute workout and hamstring workout, but you don't get the low back. So it's important, if you're on a machine that doesn't stabilize your lower extremities, is to think consciously, I just want to use my low back muscles.
Like a mind-muscle connection.
Like a mind-muscle connection, exactly. When you get to heavier loads, that's more difficult because your hips will come up off the seat. So having a seat belt is helpful in that. And then getting to the higher tech area that I had most of my clinical experience with in the Med-X equipment that absolutely isolates the low back. You can't move once you're in that device. There's a foot plate, a knee pad that takes the lever system completely out, then a lap belt that acts sort of like a fulcrum on the lever. And so even though when you're working heavy on that machine, you may contract your glutes and your hamstrings and be sore from that, but all the work's done in your low back. To put that in context, most doctors tell their patients don't lift more than 10 pounds or 20 pounds. That number is completely fabricated, and it's only arbitrary. It's taken out of the air. And the reason doctors tell their patients that is because they don't want the patients to hurt themselves, and they think by saying don't do that, then patients will be safe. The problem is, if you tell a patient not to lift more than 20 pounds, everything that patient sees when they're away from your office weighs 21 pounds. meaning they're afraid to lift anything. To put that in context, I'm 70, and when I was 66, 65, I still had a clinic in San Diego. I could do 350 foot-pounds of torque, 15 repetitions to failure on that device.
Wow.
Our low backs are very strong, and it was not uncommon for low back patients who had chronic back pain to do 100, 150 pounds isolated. And the reason that is because the multifidi have a very short stroke arm, and the lever is wonderfully compact and efficient. So if you isolate the low back, you can do a lot of lifting, much more lifting than you could ever imagine. In the chronic patients, when they see they can do that, of course you have to grade them into that. The whole attitude about how they manage themselves and life changes.
It's just to give the listeners context, I did a lower back machine this morning with my early morning workout, which was horrible in a good way, and I was only doing 200 pounds, so you're doing 315, so that gives you some
a medics machine you were in?
Correct, yeah.
Yep.
I believe so, yeah. I will just say I'm not used to that machine, that's my
Correct.
excuse.
Of course.
Law of specificity and all of that.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to go back a second. You did a great job there of just like summarizing different exercises that we can use depending on what we have access to in order to get at strengthening our lower back. I've heard before that it can be advisable, for instance, in a prone trunk extension, to maybe not squeeze the lower back muscles during the early part of the set, but maybe from rep 3 that you would squeeze the lower back muscles at that full contraction. Are you familiar with that type of guidance and would know why that would be appropriate or not?
I don't know why that would be appropriate, and I probably would wonder why, because in any weightlifting, whether it's the low back or resistance, every subsequent rep is safer, because every subsequent rep from the first one, you can generate less force, right? And the less force you generate till you get to volitional fatigue, I say that to patients rather than failure. Muscle failure, it kind of freaks them out. But volitional fatigue, the more you lift, the greater number of repetitions, the safer that exercise is. So I would wonder why you would start at a less than full attempt. I think you rob yourself a little bit of the full benefit.
Do you think there is, because I've heard some experts, I put in quotations, who aren't a huge fan of the prone trunk extension exercise. I use this as an example because it's the easiest for people who don't have access to probably do.
Exactly.
Now, is there any way that one can perform that exercise incorrectly? I think you did into that a little bit earlier, but where it might be, because I know that one expert in particular who I won't name, I think has suggested that if you're contracting really hard, that there may be some you may be doing some damage to the vertebrae or some of the muscles in that area. How do you think about that?
I'd be very surprised, only because of the tremendous loads that you can lift when you're fully stabilized. So when you're doing a prone extension lying on the ground, you're not generating that much torque, and the lever arm is long, but it's much safer than a Roman chair, for example, that you're going through full range of motion. My sense is that, with young children that have orthopedic injuries, and most parents are quite nervous, and they'll say to their doc, well, what should they do? And the physician will say, well, they'll self-regulate. If they hurt themselves, they probably won't do much more. In that regard, whatever the exercise is, in low-tech, prone, or high-tech isolated exercise, patients are pretty good reporters. If you make them part of your healthcare team, not just treat them, they'll talk to you pretty freely. If you're just treating somebody, and the great example is you go home, you talk to a friend who's been in therapy, and you say, how's therapy going? And they'll say, well, you need to talk to my therapist. If that's the case, then they haven't really become part of the gestalt of that, rehab or exercise. So if people are taught appropriately and given indicators, look, if this hurts you, there's a big difference between injury pain and muscular soreness. Mm-hmm. So I don't know about this expert, and I'm certainly no rocket scientist, but I know that a lot of systematic reviews and the Cochrane collaboration, for example, are written by scientists who really are not clinicians, and I would argue that in this conference, there are people that strength train that know intimately, I know than I do, about how to strength train and how to think about it in the day-to-day realities of that. I'm pretty good at the basic science, and in my mind, I build a platform of thought. I've treated clinically, but you can't do everything. You can't be a good writer and a good clinician. You can't be a great, clinician and be a great writer. There's always that balance, and so I'm sort of a middle-of-the-road guy who has some experience in both arenas, writing and clinical practice. But the people that are strength trainers and fitness trainers, these people know so much more intimately about the connection. If you don't connect with that person that you're working with eye to eye as a human being, the rest of it really doesn't matter, because 50%, we talked about that yesterday, 50% of a person's ability to perform is their cognitive sense of what they're doing. And if they don't buy into what you're telling them, and they don't feel that you really are sensitive to them, not just enthusiastic, but sensitive to them. There's a fellow, Jim Flanagan, that you and I both know, who is maybe the most expert guy that I know on the planet in strength training. He knows how to take a world-class bodybuilder and work them out till they can barely move. He also knows how to take somebody off the street who's never lifted and give them the appropriate workout, because he understands people. That's really the game. Our technical skills are the bus we ride as human beings to connect with others and give them what we have been gifted to have ourselves.
That's very wise words. And Jim Flanagan is a huge sweetheart and a really lovely bloke, and he's quite, can be quite intimidating to some people because he's so tall and large, but he's a really lovely bloke. And this conference is just unbelievable. I mean, we have, yourself included, some of the top experts on the planet with regard to strength training, exercise, obviously lower back pain and motivation and various other topics. So there's a little shameless plug there for the Resistance Exercise Conference, but I honestly think this is the best place to be if you're into strength training or exercise in general. It really is.
And let me say, I was a little intimidated. Most of the work of the past 40 years that I've spoken to here and overseas has been to specialty groups, orthopedic surgeons and physiotherapists for the European audience. So I'm one of the few guys in this arena of chronic back and neck pain who's an exercise physiology background. And so I can get away sometimes around the edges a little softer, although I try to be in the literature pretty strongly. But you come to a group of people who understand strength training, then you better be prepared. So although it's been wonderful, it was a great opportunity to speak here, and you're right, this is a wonderful conference. But I was uncertain coming in that this group of people...
You did get challenged a fair bit, which I thought was good, though.
It was great. Yeah. It was absolutely great. And I think... two sides of that. My clinical experience, in addition to some of the clinical research I've done, was helpful. But you always want people to, you want to listen to people that you don't agree with in the first instance to allow you to think. And you want to talk to people who are willing to challenge you. Otherwise, you don't grow.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with that. One final question before we wrap up, Ted. Going back a second, you talked about obviously the ranking of, in your view, the certain exercise that we can use to strengthen the lower back. What's the delta and the difference between, say a prone trunk extension versus the Med-X? I understand that the Med-X machine, lower back, can help isolate the lower back more effectively,
Yep.
but over the long term, are we really going to see much difference in terms of the lower back health, if we're going to use a catch-all term?
Well, that's a great question. The delta is pretty big. If Med-X is the top and you go to Roman chair next, the delta is a pretty good-sized delta. We've done some work with Roman chairs and Med-X looking at MRI changes. Having said that, if you look at the type 2B fibers, and your listeners will know there are gradations within, even beyond type 1 and type 2, but if you look at the type 2B fibers, under normal circumstances, they're atrophic in healthy people with no back pain. So with the surgical group I was with for a decade or so in Missouri, when a discectomy is done surgically, the multifidus in that segment is taken out and thrown away. People think when the surgery is done that you're sort of, the disc is taken in or whatever and you're intact. That's not true. In an open discectomy, the multifidus on that side is removed. So we did some muscle assessment of that. And there are papers in the literature also, and we found what had already been published, that normal type 2B fibers are moth-eaten, and they look like they're atrophic, and they actually look pathologic. So when you strengthen the low back, really at any level, you're engaging those muscles. So when you get older, you sort of become less dogmatic. I think anything that you do for the low back, I think any exercise that you do, if it's a strengthening exercise, I think aerobic activity and other things like that are good for recreational stuff. But if you're talking function, it's strength. And for the low back, I think it's strength. So the delta's big, but you get benefit because in normal circumstances, you don't have anything.
Could you be more specific on the delta in relation to what measures?
Well, the measure strength, and so there's a complicating factor because, for example, if you test in a medics machine, and then you train in the medics machine, and then you train on a Roman chair, the dynamics are different during the training, right? So when you put somebody back in the medics machine after they trained on the Roman chair in that mechanical position, unrelated to all factors considered, they're probably going to perform less well simply because the way they trained was different than the way we tested them. That's the dilemma clinically, and that's really the dilemma in all physical performance. We often test people and then create control groups or other experimental groups that train differently than the way we test them, and that's a confounding factor.
Sure. I appreciate your point on that. Ted, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for joining me for this short time together at the Resistance Exercise Conference. Hopefully we can talk again and a longer form show in the future, and that'll probably be done overseas if you've got time for that. For everyone listening, I keep saying this at the end of all these interviews, but I'm probably going to stitch some kind of close to all of the Resistance Exercise Conference interviews together. But if I don't, then you can find the show notes to this one on corporatewarrior.org, and you'll find the episode listed there. And thank you very much for listening. Hi guys, it's Lawrence from the Corporate Warrior podcast. I'm at the Resistance Exercise Conference with Rob Morton, who just gave an awesome presentation on the subject of protein consumption and resistance training with regard to muscle strength and hypertrophy and endurance and stuff like that. It was very, very interesting. Do you want to just give a brief overview of your presentation and maybe not necessarily the beginning, which is obviously you just setting the scene, but just in terms of the findings and that kind of a brief overview of the presentation, if you can, Rob, and we'll just go from there.
Yeah. Well, first, thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be on the podcast. I'm obviously a huge fan. But I can give you my take-home points from that presentation. It was that hypertrophy occurs when we add in new muscle proteins to an existing muscle cell. Resistance exercise in particular is a lot more potent than protein supplementation, but protein supplementation is definitely beneficial, at least during periods of resistance training, up to about 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. I think those are the main points of my presentation anyway.
Cool. No, I appreciate you being so succinct. Because I think, a number of people listening to this, they're really into their strength training. They may be strength training business owners who are trying to get the most out of their own training and the training with their clients and the recommendations they give. So they're probably quite aware of some of that stuff. And I wanted just to dig into some of that and ask some questions around it. So one of the things is with regard to this timing concept. So, for a long period of time, there was this theory that the anabolic window was a tiny window, and if you didn't eat protein within an hour of working out, your muscles would fall off, or that it would be suboptimal. Yeah. And what we've realised lately is that actually, if you get it in within 24 hours, it's all good. Now, are there any caveats to that? For instance, let's say you wake up in the morning and you're fasted. You haven't eaten since 8 p.m. the previous day, and you go straight into a workout, like a high intensity training style workout. Does that change anything at all?
Well, I think it's still prudent to recommend taking a protein meal after you work out. My point up there was that was a study by Nick Bird, and that's that our muscle is still sensitive to the amino acids 24 hours after we work out. But it may still be in our best interest to eat after we work out. In terms of your question there, working out when you're fasted, I think there's also an energy demand there where you might want to eat something just so you have fuel to use during your workout. There's plenty of studies that compare like a high glycogen diet versus a low glycogen diet that would kind of mimic fasting. And you can definitely work harder when you have fuel to use or glycogen stored in your muscle cells. Yeah.
Interesting, because so there's a number of people obviously in this community that do train fasted and train very intensely fasted. I do that myself, and but you actually believe that actually you might perform better and get better results if you're eating something beforehand. Like what might you recommend in terms of like macros and timing on that? Like how much time before the workout as well? Any recommendations?
It's tough for me to answer that with the science that I know anyway, but I definitely think there's plenty of evidence that you can work harder when you have more muscle glycogen. Yeah, there's a study by Hansen, is the first author, a study by YEO, I'm not sure how to say it, but that was the first author, that was in 2008, that compared a high glycogen and a low glycogen diet. And the training while you have fuel is definitely, you can work harder. So that would be my argument for anyone who's training fasted, is maybe you can get fat adapted or whatever expression you want to use, but I think there's plenty of evidence to say that you can work harder when you're not fasted. Yeah, so I think that's my point.
And if you're working harder, you're likely to stimulate greater improvement.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. What about, like, for instance, if you've had like a real, like you've carb backloaded the previous day. Let's say you've had like a steak and 2 sweet potatoes, and you've properly filled up your glycogen stores in your liver and muscle, and then you work out, let's say 10 a.m. the next day on an empty stomach. Are you saying that you're still likely you're going to have less than optimal glycogen reserves in that context?
You know what? I don't think I'm the best person to answer that question when it comes to carb loading and things like that. It'd be better to ask maybe Marty Cabal, ask, or you can Droop, someone, or John Hawley, someone who studies a bit more of that. But I think if you carb load, you're going to be just fine. But training all the time fasted, I don't think is optimal.
Okay.
Yeah. Whether you carb load or not.
And when we say optimal, do you mean for muscle hypertrophy or what?
For how hard
outcomes?
You can, for like the peak power output that you can produce on a bike, for example.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which I guess is indicative of optimal outcomes. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay,
You
cool.
can work harder. You can, you can increase your certain protein synthesis and make more mitochondria, whatever it may be. Yeah.
Okay. So, big question, I think, for us hard gainers listening, and
look at me, Lawrence. I'm a hard gainer too.
I don't know. You look pretty impressive. I saw you work out this morning.
Oh my God, I'm still shaking. Oh.
Yeah, we both are. And obviously, a lot of people at this conference are very keen to understand how to maximize muscle hypertrophy. My journey on this podcast, and you've listened to a few of the shows, so it's gone from one of discovering high intensity training, which kind of got me. I originally got so attracted to this form of exercise because I thought it was like a magic bullet for the hard gainer. But the more and more I understood, the more interviews I did, the more books I read, the more I learned about this subject, is that genes dictate practically everything, and that choosing your parents is probably the best thing you can do for optimal gains.
Yeah, you gotta pick mom and dad. Yeah.
Right, and that everything else is pretty much like as long as you're training with a high degree of effort, like a few times a week, that almost, and getting enough protein, it would seem that everything else is splitting hairs and not that important. And the question I have for you is, like, this stuff we're talking about today, things like let's talk about protein intake, for example. So you recommend 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight
per day,
for optimal gains. Now, how important is this over the long term? Let's say, for instance, if someone's looking at like a 10-year period of training and living well, do we really have to get that? Is that really going to make a huge difference versus like 1 gram per Yeah.
Well, so this is a question I can actually answer.
Cool.
Part of the analysis that we did for that systematic review, meta-analysis, meta-regression that we recently published with Brad, I know he's been on your podcast, he's an author on that, and Stu, obviously, was that in general, the benefit you get from protein supplementation, period, is relatively small compared to the benefit you get from the actual resistance exercise training that you do. And we're talking at least 75 to 90% of your change in muscle mass is coming from the effort you put in resistance training, not from whether or not you supplemented your diet with protein or not. Yeah, and I think that's a huge message. That many trainers, especially at the conference we're at now, they probably know that, but at least we have data to concretely answer that question.
Because this is the thing, like, some of the people had on the show recently, and I imagine some of the people at this conference aren't big proponents of high protein intake. They probably have higher carb intakes. And along those lines, they know that resistance training is the most important variable. So do you think that those people are, I mean, obviously there's other dangers potentially of over-consuming carbs. It depends on what those carbs, where they're coming from as well.
Yeah. If you're burning them or not. Yeah, sure.
Right, exactly. Sure. But do you think that's a bad idea to have perhaps a low protein intake, in light of all this research?
To have a low protein intake?
Yeah.
I think you need amino acids. There are essential amino acids. There's 9 of them. So you do need to consume a fair amount of protein to supply your muscles with the amino acids they need for future protein creation. That's especially true during periods of weight loss. You may, when you're in a caloric deficit, you may pull energy from your muscle. You may take those amino acids, use them as intermediates, oxidize them, use them for energy, however which way. But if you're taking in a lot of protein, you can hold on to more of your muscle mass. So I didn't talk too much about it here, but I get tons of questions on the ketogenic diet, and that's low carb, relatively low protein.
That's right.
Really high fat, and that's the traditional ketogenic diet. And my asterisk there is that great, you can lose a lot of weight, but you're also losing maybe 20-30% of that is coming from muscle. So when you're in a caloric deficit, you want to have high protein so you don't turn over or use your existing muscle and the amino acids you're storing in there for energy.
Okay.
Did that make sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely, 100%. One of the things you mentioned, because we were a bit short on time for those listening, so Rob had to speed through some of the slides, which left me like, oh no, wait, I need to know more about that. You had a slide about that showed that with carbohydrate, I can't remember the context now, it made no difference. Could you elaborate on what that was about?
Yeah, that was Aaron Staples did that study. He did either 25 grams of whey protein or 25 grams of whey protein with, I think it was 50 grams of maltodextrin. So a lot of carbohydrate, with the idea that that's really going to increase insulin. Maybe that can get amino acids into your muscle more or less. The conclusion of that was that protein synthesis was not higher if you took your protein with that extra 50 grams of maltodextrin. Now, insulin may suppress muscle protein breakdown, but we don't think that protein breakdown doesn't flux as much, doesn't go up and down as much as protein synthesis. So we do need a certain amount of muscle protein breakdown to get rid of damaged or dysfunctional proteins, for example. So we don't think suppressing breakdown is a strategy we should be chasing to improve muscle mass. That's why we typically measure and talk about protein synthesis. The point is, protein synthesis was not higher if you take your protein with carbohydrate.
So there's no reason to consume carbohydrate in your post-workout meal?
Not on protein synthesis at least, but if you deplete all your glycogen, you want to refuel. Absolutely, you want carbohydrate to get more glucose stored as glycogen into your muscle. That's definitely a strategy. I was just talking about muscle proteins, muscle growth, acute muscle growth.
Right. Okay.
Carbohydrates don't seem to benefit.
Okay, so just sorry, I don't fully understand. So, do you mean to say that if you're refilling those glycogen stores afterwards, why might that be important? Would that be important for like recovery, or
I think for
complementing the muscle growth process, or
not complementing the muscle growth process, but for your next bout of exercise, whatever that may be.
Because in the context of strength training, let's say you're doing intense work like twice a week, like, a lot of the guys here at this conference will be training that type of intensity, that frequency. Do you think in that context it matters?
I do, definitely. I can tell you from anecdotally this morning, one of the major fuels, probably the major fuel, the most ATP you're generating is coming from glycogen, your glycogen store. That's what we are using when we're doing resistance exercise. So we deplete it. We want to just restore all that we just depleted. That's the strategy there. Yeah. Okay. And I think there's definitely some rationale for that. I think if we didn't have carbohydrates in that sense and we needed to increase blood glucose, for example, we would pull from amino acids and fat, but amino acids as well to create new glucose. That's gluconeogenesis. And we don't want that. We don't want to use our stored amino acids to create glucose. Okay. So I think probably better rationale to take it in your diet.
So I heard a rumor from Blair that there are some other research papers that are coming out or to be published or what have you. And I understand some of that is around the practical application of what you spoke about today. I'd love to hear more about that, and I'd be really excited if you had practical recommendations for diet and training for as well for optimal gains, if that's something that you've done as well.
Well, we published a paper in 2015, and the title of the paper is something close to Nutritional Interventions to Augment Training-Induced Gains in Muscle Hypertrophy. That would be a cool paper that I think we've answered a lot of those questions. But even from the talk today, if I've learned anything in the studies that aren't published that may be coming out soon, that's that resistance training variables like the time you spend under tension, the load you lift with, the total volume you do, the repetitions you do, the rest interval you take, all of that is relatively moot in comparison to the effort that you put in. If you put a significant amount of effort in, you're going to tap into your type 1 motor units or your type 1 muscle fibers, your slower oxidative muscle fibers, and as those fatigue, you're going to eventually tap into your type 2 muscle fibers or your larger motor units. So we think that effort is probably the most important piece to resistance training. And then protein supplementation does benefit as well, at least up into about that sweet spot, 1.6-ish grams of protein per kilogram per day.
So do you have any tell me, how does this inform you? I mean, you look pretty fit and healthy. You seem like you do a lot of this stuff yourself, right? So how have these findings informed you, and what does that mean in terms of what your workouts look like and your diet?
That's a good question. Honestly, my routine has changed a ton from the studies that we do, from what I've learned at this conference. I'm coming around to this HIIT. I think it's realistic to say that not all of us have time for big 2-hour-long workouts anymore. That's why Marty Gabala's HIIT, HIIT training is gaining so much momentum, is because it's quick and dirty. You're in and out.
That's right.
So I really like this. I like the what we're learning at this conference, where 1, maybe 2 sets, going as hard as you possibly can with some overloads. Just absolutely blitz yourself and then get out. And I think the busier I get, the more emails that are coming in, I just want to get in. I want to work hard. I know that that's going to benefit me just as much as if I spend 2 hours in there, at least for hypertrophy. So I think that's how all of this has changed my training. It's just, you know what? It's not about all these my specific periodization, this and that. Jeremy Lonecki could talk to you about his opinions about periodization, but I think it's changed me in the way that I just train harder now, and less focus on the subtleties of my training program.
Yeah. Cool. So what's your training look like at the moment?
Well, right now I lift weights twice a week and I play sports 4 times a week.
What sports you play?
I used to play rugby. I don't anymore. Now 3 times a week I play ice hockey. Okay. I play just beer league, pickup men's soccer now too. Nice. It's unfortunate. That used to be a huge passion of mine. Football, sorry. But I do that. I don't know if you can. It is a sport. I also curl. That's more of a social thing now.
Really?
But
with the brushes, the brooms.
yeah.
They're not called that, are they?
No,
They're
brooms.
called something totally cool.
I'll take brooms.
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, no brushes may insult some people.
Whoops. I do that. I'm used to doing that on this podcast. Cool. Okay, so that's interesting.
That's my background. I mean, like you, I mean, all of this passion for this field comes out of my own interest in athletics. And, I mean, I used to want to be like the head of the IOC sports scientist. That was always my goal. So I love playing sports just as much as I love training. So I train twice a week, but I play sports about four.
What about your diet? What's your diet look like?
I'm pretty particular about my diet. Just 'cause I should be. I study it.
Yeah,
I use MyFitnessPal. I absolutely love it. It's super easy.
Okay.
I say that I don't do a carnivore diet. I don't do a keto diet. I do a relatively low carbohydrate, relatively low fat, high protein diet.
Okay.
That's my bread and butter. I find it works real well.
1.6 per, like that, is that what you aim for? Like 1.6 grams per kilogram?
Yeah.
So for you, 80 kilograms, roughly?
Yeah, so for me, I take close to 5 or 6 meals of about 20 to 25 grams of protein. At least one of those meals in quotations comes from a protein shake. And normally I take it after I work out or play sports.
So that's interesting. Okay, so 5 meals a day, 5 smaller meals. Okay, so you think that would be based on that research, I guess, on the that you talked about, and we can reference this in the show notes, about the different quantities of protein and doses that was most effective for MPS, was the 4 doses a day versus 2 big doses, or
the Jose Reda paper.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah. So that was a great paper. What I'm thinking, in addition to that, is Dan Moore. You should get him on this podcast. He's awesome. He's a prof at University of Toronto.
Dan Moore.
Has he been on this podcast?
I think it might be a different Dan Moore, but I've certainly had a Dan Moore email me a few times. So.
Okay, you got to get him. if the email comes from a U of T, University of Toronto email, it's the Dan Moore I'm talking about.
Okay.
He's got an awesome study, very similar to the 1.6 that I showed today. Basically what he did is he looked at muscle protein synthesis data from a bunch of different studies. I mean, these studies came from Kevin Tipton, Ollie Whittard, Stu Phillips, Dan himself. But what they found is that as you increase your protein dose, this is just like one bolus, one shot of protein. As you increase that amount, you increase your muscle protein synthesis. So picture muscle protein synthesis on the y-axis. X-axis is protein dose. You increase protein dose, you increase protein synthesis up into a point. There's a break point or an inflection point. That's at about 0.25 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. Or if you normalize to lean mass, it's the same, about 0.25 grams of protein per kilo. So for me, at 80 kilos, that's about 20 to 25 grams of protein per dose. And I got to get up to about 1.6 per day, 1.6 grams of protein per kilo. So that's about 5 or 6 0.25 grams per kilo doses.
Yeah.
That's where I'm getting those numbers from. Yeah, I'm combining. Yeah, you got to get down on. He can talk about that. Yeah. I'm combining that 2015 paper that he's done with the meta-analysis we did, and I think those are pretty concrete and large data set studies.
Do you think? I mean, I'm heavily biased because I like fasting, and I like the efficient eating approach to 2 big meals a day, which is generally what I do. So that's why I'm going to challenge you.
Cool.
But do you think there's a big delta in improvement between someone who does that versus the frequent meal intake? And forgive me if your study you reference already kind of addresses this to an extent.
Yeah. So in our meta-analysis, what we did is, so you can measure your total effect. That's what you get from a meta-analysis.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of things that may affect that effect. So maybe men and women respond differently, or a trained person or an untrained person, or as you age, protein supplementation is less effective, or something like that. One of the things we looked at is the dose of protein. So your question, if I take 2 massive boluses compared to maybe 4 or 5 smaller boluses, does that really matter over a long period of time?
There it is.
And the answer that we found is that no, not so much. But going back to that Jose Reda paper, now we're just talking about muscle protein synthesis, so a relatively acute and sensitive measure. He did that, a bunch of small pulses, 10 grams of protein a bunch of times during the day. I think it was 8. Or intermediate, 20 grams 4 times, or 2, like what you're saying, 2 40-gram boluses. And he found that over 12 hours, the frequent and moderate doses were the best. But again, that's a pretty sensitive and acute measurement. In our meta-analysis where we did a meta-regression on whether or not that mattered. Not so much. Not so much.
Now, interesting. So I've kept you far too long, Rob, because
I love it. I'm a huge fan of this podcast, so
I appreciate it. I wanted to ask you questions during the presentation, but I know that Luke won't give me the mic because he knows that I'm going to be interviewing.
I did see him avoid certain people. It was kind of
really
funny.
Okay. But I do have one final question for you. There's this saying. I'm not sure you probably are familiar with it. Which is kind of like what some experts, the way they address a lot of these different resistance training protocols and I guess different interventions for trying to gain muscle, is that all roads lead to Rome eventually. So I'm just really curious, have you come across that as a saying for...
I've heard the saying, not in terms of resistance training, but I think I'm getting... the message.
Yeah, it's like, Skylar and I earlier today were talking about, different strength training protocols and ways of going about it. Like, for instance, this morning we were doing like negatives and pre-exhaust and all this.
I got PTSD.
And I was saying, as a lot of my audience know, I tend to do train to positive failure with body weight, and I'm just curious, over time, genetics ultimately determine how much muscle you can put on your body, and do you agree with the notion that all these different protocols lead to the same destination?
Yeah, I think that was my point when I answered your question of how all this has changed me, or my training. Yeah, I think largely all these different manipulations of our training protocol are relatively insignificant to the fact that we're in the gym and we're working very hard, and are definitely insignificant. I mean, on a public health standpoint, anything is better than nothing. So we can get lost in the minutiae of different training variables, but all roads lead to Rome for sure. Yeah, if we work hard enough. Yeah,
I pushed you into a little bit of a corner there, so I tried not to do that. You seem
trying to scratch out.
Yeah. But I'm just fascinated by this kind of convergence of what I see in science, with regard to the work from yourself and Stu Phillips and James Steele, James Fisher, and then also guys like Brad and Menno. It does seem that, and Jeremy Lenicky, it does seem that like the viewpoints are kind of, if you really, obviously you understand this, but I think a lot of people who look at the literature don't, and me included, aren't always very good at interpreting it and understanding it. And when you really understand it and you look for what it's actually saying, there is a lot of similarities, and I don't think there is much in the way of differences in opinion as some may think.
And I think that's the sign of good science, is reproducibility. I mean, at the highest level, at least with the guys you mentioned, Stu, Steele, Fisher, Jeremy, Brad, for example, we're finding just that. If you work hard, you're going to get adaptations. You can periodize, you can do this, you can do that. But it's a good thing we're all coming to this conclusion.
It is. Yeah. Any kind of last words, bits of advice for the listeners? Perhaps there's anything you've got on your mind about, going on this theme of kind of optimizing muscle hypertrophy. Is there any other recommendations that you might want to provide?
No, I think I just hammer the message home that consistency and effort are king, above all else. And then if you want to supplement with protein, or make sure you get 1.6 grams of protein per kilo per day, I think that's smart too. But consistency and effort are king.
Awesome, cool. So thank you very much, Rob, for your time. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me on.
It's a pleasure. And for everyone listening, this is like the sixth time I've done this today, and these will probably all be stitched together. So this may be pointless me saying this because I might record a close separately, but if I don't, you'll be able to find all the show notes to this over at corporatewarrior.org. The episode will be listed, the show notes for all of the mini interviews recorded at the Resistance Exercise Conference. And thank you very much again for listening.
I hope you enjoyed that episode. Before you head off, head on over to corpwarrior.com, that's CORP warrior.com, to get your free high-intensity training Google Progress chart and ebook with 6 interview transcripts of some of my top guests, including Dr. Doug McGuff, Drew Bay, and Bill Simone, on how to optimize muscle gain, fat loss, and overall health in an efficient, effective, and sustainable way. These transcripts are deliberately not verbatim. Instead, they've been transcribed in an easy read format to make it more enjoyable and easier for you to quickly pick out what you need and start getting results. To get your ebook, head on over to corpwarrior.com, enter your email address, then check your email for an email from me with a confirmation link. Once you click the link, you will be instantly redirected to a PDF version of the transcripts. This podcast is brought to you by HitUni.com. HitUni.com are a provider of amazing online courses for high-intensity training qualifications. HitUni comes highly recommended by the best in the field, including Body by Science co-author Dr. Doug McGuff, Discover Strength CEO Luke Carlson, and trainer and founder of Bay.com, Drew Bay. It was founded by my friend, author, and longtime personal trainer Simon Shawcross, who's also been a guest on the podcast. Simon has 15 years experience training clients and has supervised over 15,000 high-intensity training workouts. Using knowledge from experts like Skylar Tanner, Dr. James Steele, Dr. Ellington Darden, HitUni is a goldmine for learning everything to do with high-intensity training. The courses are delivered online through the website, where you can learn via a variety of multimedia materials at your own pace. There's online support and a discussion forum where you can share ideas and ask for help. To learn more about high-intensity training and improve my own results, I started their personal trainer course. The content is amazing, the courses are really easy to follow, and each section is organised into bite-sized chunks that give you a real sense of achievement after you complete each one. I should also mention there is a DIY course, so this is the course for you if you're not necessarily a personal trainer, but you want to learn more about high-intensity training and how to implement it for maximum benefit in your own exercise regime. To get your exclusive Corporate Warrior 10% discount on any course you purchase, simply head on over to hituni.com, that's hituni.com, and enter the coupon code CW10, that's CW and the number 10. So again, head on over to hituni.com, pick your course, and enter the coupon code CW10 for 10% discount. Thank you for your support.